Hi, I'm Oded and I'm a software architect for the Wix Infrastructure Group.
I'm Avi and I'm a principal infrastructure engineer in the Wix backend guild. Today we're going to talk about three really interesting topics. The first one will be API first design paradigm. The second one will be developing and delivering code in a microservices based environment. And the third one will be all about data modeling. So stay tuned.
Hi everyone. Today I will start by sharing a real personal experience that I had when I came to Wix. It was around 5 years ago. I came from a small startup where I did both the front and the back end, and it worked flawlessly, although we didn't have too many users, so I don't know if I can really say it. And then I came to Wix, specifically to the e-commerce department, and they told me that the most complicated service that they had is a products catalog. And I said, like, what? I mean, what's the big deal here? A product catalog. So you have an HTTP server, and you have some MySQL database, and it turns out to really be a MySQL database, and with a table with the products, and you have the listing and getting on the product. So what's the deal here? Why is it so complicated? And when I say complicated, it is literally like years of work spent on this, and now it's soon going to be rewritten. So obviously there is something there. And it took me a while, like after I think a year or so in Wix, I understood. Okay, and what I understood is that designing software at scale is not simple. If you want to write something to demo or to POC or something that doesn't need to run for too many users, that's not a problem. You can do whatever you want, but if you want to design software at scale, if you want it to integrate with other companies and other products, if you want other people to be able to work with it, then you need to know how to design your software.
So once you started it, so what was the first thing that you do after they told you when you want to design a brand new catalog? You saw you had kind of familiarity with the existing version, I guess.
So first,
what was your first steps?
So the first step, before anything, I want to know the requirements. I want to know what do I need to build, okay? So, and how much scale does it need to load. So for the sake of this discussion, I will bring up the requirements. Obviously, I will make them more minimized because the real catalog is big. But specifically, I'm sure that any of you have been to an e-commerce site once or twice or many times. And there are two basic things that you have there. One is a gallery. You open, you see some kind of, usually a grid or something, a gallery with all the products. And it has names, prices, also images, but let's put this aside. And then you can click on such a product, and you have a product page, and then you can buy it. So we're not going to talk about buying it. That's like this is another thing. But being able to, I guess, create products, edit products, which properties are name and price. So this is the first. But what? Anything else I should mention?
No, I think basically all of us have tried using basically firsthand used e-commerce websites. It does look to a lot of people like a simple system. It basically products, maybe has a few categories, maybe have a few variants for the products, and then you can just choose one. It has a price, it has maybe a stock and inventory or something, but nothing too fancy, because people, when they think about a catalog, they're simply thinking about a store when they're facing store in the street. So think like, okay, we have a store here, we have some products, they have prices, look pretty simple, and all the examples in the software blogs are doing an e-commerce system, so it looks pretty easy.
That sounds simple. So at least we know that even if we start with name and price, we understand that this is not where it's going to end.
Yeah.
And even if for the real system, even if I would actually say all the requirements right now, I would know that this will keep evolving. For example, right now in Wix, they're going to develop bundles, which is another feature over the e-commerce, and it's never going to end, which is great because Wix is growing, so it keeps developing more requirements.
So I guess your main purpose is to actually build a solid foundation for the future as well, not just doing a system, designing a system for the short term, but you're thinking about the long term.
Yes.
So when thinking about the long term, and you knew that your task is actually to develop a catalog, a full-fledged catalog service, what was your first things when you started off?
So what I did learn this in Wix, I'm a big believer of the API first approach.
Okay.
I mean, you need to start somewhere. You have these requirements. I would say that commonly they would be served as some form of a PowerPoint, right? you have the screens, you kind of understand what you have to do. And I guess many people start from the database, at least from my experience, say, okay, so this is the data, so this is how I need to save it.
But at the end of the day, engineers like to engineer, right? So,
Yes.
So we immediately think about databases and code, right?
So that works. So if you think about API first, you can read the article that I wrote about my personal experience, because Wix did not initially work API first.
Oh.
When I came 5 years ago, this was not adopted. I came, I think, right at the time that Wix started to adopt it, and then gradually Wix adopted it more and more. So I wrote an article about my experience.
Okay, just to share with our viewers, basically API first, referring to the paradigm of firstly not doing any kind of code, but just declaring your API requirements like with the product, maybe doing it like a domain discovery, right?
Yes.
And before you touch any line of code, you have vast majority of your API already designed, right?
That's right. And wait, what happens when you don't do this?
Okay, let's talk about that.
Which is, I guess, before I came to Wix, it's what I mostly saw. So it means that, let's say that you are the front-end developer, and I'm the back-end developer. Cool. Assuming that we are two different people, maybe it's just me and myself. Yeah. We'll be talking. We'll be agree on some API that both of us seem to agree on. Maybe there's also the team leader. We'll consult with him, and we'll build something that we we can understand.
The contract gets closed in the kitchen, right?
Yeah.
Over at the quick
talk.
It's
literally how it happened. Like two people talking, and all right. So this is the contract. This is the API of the catalog. And that's it. So
other people will see it and say like, well, it sounds great. We can work fast like that, right? Everything can go fast.
It's not necessarily a bad approach at least if you're working for a small startup or a company which isn't too big. And it works until it doesn't work.
Okay, explain that.
It doesn't work once. Okay, so first, probably the least of your problem, but more developers come and they don't understand your API, or they need to extend it. But you never consider how to extend it or anything. You just built it for what you needed at the moment. But even if you were smart, you built a good internal API that is capable of extending, but still only you can understand it. And then someone comes from another team and want to integrate with it.
Yeah.
But for example, if you think about the product catalog, then another company might want to promote it, send campaign emails, and then they need to be able to access the product through the API, and it already sounds bad, they're going to talk to you. Now, we as developers, we don't want to talk to people, right? You want to sit with the headphones. Mm-hmm. So while this seems like a joke, in this case, it might actually be a good thing that you can keep your headphones. Yeah. So whoever wants to integrate you needs to talk to you because he cannot understand your API. Hell, he has no idea where is your API.
Yeah.
He has no idea how to authenticate your API. And not to mention, so this is someone from within your company, so he talks to you, and I've seen it, after a long and miserable road, eventually he is able to connect with you, but you have never really considered the thing that you have to support it, so now you can't break backwards compatibility.
So basically, the way I look at it, I also a big fan of the API first approach. And when I look at it, it's like when developers run and implement code before knowing all the requirements, what they end up doing is actually separating the product teams from the product. They're saying like, I'm way smarter maybe than the product guy. I can implement the catalog and know what they want. And then after like a year or two, they found out the product was kind of wrong. So by saying to the organization, I won't gonna write any line of code before my API is done, you're doing like a procedure with the product teams where you have like a handshake and you're saying like, both of us agreed that this is the product we want to build. And I don't care about which programming language am I going to use, which database I'm going to use, what would be like my patterns, my design patterns, but we agree on the product. And by analyzing the product, if we're looking especially for the long run, I guess there is higher chances we're going to build something that will last, right?
I agree. So if you come specifically to tackle the question of the catalog, so you need to answer two basic questions. Like one, what is a product in this case?
Literally, what is a product?
What is a product? Yes.
In that case.
In this case, yeah. So every API should have something called a main entity. The thing that the API is about. So if it's a catalog, the main entity is obviously
product, I guess.
Product. If it's inventory, maybe it's an inventory item. If it's in orders, then the main entity is in order. So you need to first define what is a product. So we have taken a rather simple path to say, well, product is something that has name and a price.
Okay.
In reality, it is more complicated. You know, it also has media.
But you have to start with something, I guess.
Yeah, so this is a good place to start.
But what's the process? Like the first thing you say, like I want to do an API first design. So you're making like a first meeting with the product team, or like how does it actually work when you were in this position?
So there is more than one way to go.
Okay.
Ideally, the product should define the capabilities, which is, by the way, is kind of the next thing. After you define what the entity, you need to define the capabilities. You know, I can create a product, delete a product.
You mean the behavior?
Yes.
Okay.
So ideally, the product manager will say what he wants. It's not about the presentation. Here, I'm showing you a gallery.
Yeah.
No, you should be able to list the products in the store. You should be able to get individual products. You should be able to create them. You should be able to delete them. You should be able to update them.
You mean like a precise user journey?
Yes.
Okay.
But without thinking about the UI, also it's often terms headless. So you need to be, the product needs to start thinking this way. It means that maybe the product manager in the future and even now needs to be a little more technical than what I personally seen in the market. If it exists, then great. If not, then the developer or one of the developers, or in Wix we have a role called API master or an architect, would have to kind of step into this place and be the mediator between the product and the development.
For me, it sounds like basically you're saying like, doesn't matter how much of a good developer I am. At the end of the day, I have the domain expert. The domain expert is the product guy in the product team, and I can only gain benefits if I'm gonna start and actually discover the domain along with him instead of just writing a bunch of code, right?
Exactly. And also, if you try to write the API and you don't, let's say that, and you don't consult with him, then you're not going to end up the way you want.
I totally agree.
And you know, sometimes you feel, hey, he's a product manager, like they're not technical, they will not understand it.
Yeah.
But we'll talk also about what tools there are. But even if you have a Word document where you wrote what is a product and what are the capabilities and the endpoints, and you show it to a product manager, they understand.
Okay.
They might not understand it as well as you understand it. They don't understand it. They don't need to care how it's going to be implemented. And also, that's a good thing because, you know, we haven't talked a bit about implementation. And when I design APIs, I try not to care about it. I don't care what system there is. I don't care what technology we use, what limitations we have. I don't care. I will design a perfect API. And maybe after I designed it, when it comes to the implementation, there will be some difficult points and the API will change.
And gaps,
Yeah, but at least I will design the
it sounds in essence you want to separate the what from the how, right? So it sounds for me like that, but what I wanted to say is like a lot of developers, probably a lot of the people who are seeing this video right now, they're asking like, okay, API first sounds good. We all heard about it. We all read about it. But they will tell you like, when we tried API first in our company, what happened is that we got into a paralysis analysis. Now they have like a product team that is so afraid to start developing, and we keep fighting about the product specs for like half a year. So when you worked with the product team, when was enough to even start something? Or you said like, until I have the full product written down, I'm going to start. So what was like the balance between those?
So, you know, the question you just asked kind of reminds me of, when is it enough to push the code? You know, I can also endlessly work on the code until it's perfect.
You have an army of developers ready to write the code, and you said like, wait, I'm working with the product guy.
First, many of, like, it sometimes seems like, oh, and this is really how it works. You write the API and then you review it, and there are like endless iterations, and you want to tear your hair out. But many of the dilemmas that you face while writing the API would simply be dilemmas that you would face later. So it centralizes it into one point in time. It only seems like you are stepping in place, but you're not. You're defining the product, but still, you have to make a cutoff at some point. In the end, you also need to deliver software. I mean, any paradigm is good. API first is amazing, but it does force you to think about all the requirements up front, and you cannot think about the requirements.
So you mean like API first, not like in the waterfall kind of an approach when you say like, I'm going to enter the room 2 months and design API, but once you have enough requirements and feel confident, you can start developing. So maybe you have like some fixes afterwards and stuff, but it's okay. And then we'll move to the next requirements and yet another iteration of first designing the API, then it's like a factory, right?
And personally, I've been an architect for like 3 or 4 years so far. And I always start with the thought, look, this is wrong. Whatever I'm doing, it is correct for this point in time, and I will do my best. I will not try to assume that this is going to last forever. This is V1, there's going to be V2.
Sounds nice.
I will do it best according to the current requirements, but at some point I will stop, because otherwise this is never going to end. And so if the API needs to be mature enough, it answers the requirements that you have given thought, but not endlessly, to future requirements that because in reality there's phase 1, phase 2. So you design for phase 1 while having phase 2 in mind, and you don't know phase 3, and always remember, you don't know what you don't know. And
totally.
You can't fight it.
So you're using your common sense to be like, at some point you say like, okay, I feel I have enough to start with. It doesn't mean I won't explore the domain more, but I have enough to start with, and let's get go. So, and during the development, let's say your developer starting the feature and they're implementing the first set of features. Once they tell you like, Oded, I have the feature written down, do you involve the product people to see the features, or you are like, feel the contract is strong enough? How do you validate that what actually the developers made coexist with what the product people required?
So this, I would say, like reality and a bit of ideal world. So look, in reality, you do develop features. So there's front and back.
Front and back.
And the feature.
And sometimes like mobile front. And
this is agile. So you should develop the smallest pieces possible, and then demo them and QA them, so you can get quick feedback cycles.
So you get the demo. You mean by demo, it's like demoing into the product to demand the requirement.
To the product, yes. So this is what you want. I mean. When you develop something, also you want to develop as fast as possible to close the cycle. So this is not related to API first, but in an ideal world, the product would test your APIs. Okay, it will not just be looking at your product, but he will use some tool, doesn't matter which one, to actually make calls to the API. He will understand what, and we'll talk about it later, I guess, what other companies might do with them.
Okay, so you're saying by a tool, you're saying like something like Postman, or just using calling the API literally, but saying the request?
Postman is great, and she needs to be aware of what other companies that out there, what they might do with these APIs, what use cases out there, maybe what competitors have.
Okay, so it's a full-blown research about the content world. Got it. So once you have the product kind of written down, and you're proud of yourself, you did like this API first approach paradigm, you realize the domain, you now know way more about the domain scope than you knew before. The product people are like happy because you co-worked with them. Now we need to write actually the API. So let's talk about specifically in Wix. Once you want to start with the API, you know how your API looks, what the data is operates with. So how do you start? Do you just model like JSONs? Do you have like a language when you model the specs? How does it actually work?
So Wix had to face this dilemma again, like when I came around 5 years ago. And so first they built a team for it. Okay, this is also important. Wix is a big company. They understood that they're going to need to make a mind shift in the entire company, so they built an architect team. They had to bring up a tool. Specifically, Wix has selected Protobuf, also being used in Google, which allows you to write, like you said, it allows you to write APIs in its own language.
So Protobuf is basically like intermediate definition language, which lets you to actually write a specific format of messages, and then you can generate code out of it. Like from what I know, I saw the same stuff with Facebook has the Thrift. With Thrift is like a similar language to Proto, and a lot of people in the data community using Avro, but it's all the same basically, right? It's like a higher level of a language when you can model specs and generate code from multiple languages, right?
Yes, the idea is really similar. I guess each one has its pros and cons. You know, Proto is great.
Yeah, because it works really good with gRPC, right?
Yes.
Like, okay, cool.
I mean, in the end, you can write your API in a neutral language, and then you can generate code for client and server for pretty much any language that you want. Cool. For example, Wix uses Scala, not exactly the most common language in the industry, and it works. Wix had to do some adjustments.
Because I'm sure Proto you can generate from Scala to TypeScript to even .NET or like everything. Cool. So once you have like the requirements from the product, I guess you're starting to formalize them into methods and endpoints, right? And you started defining them on Proto, right? And then once you have it down, you generate the code, and then you're writing to a place when you just need to implement your logic, right? So basically, Wix is a big company, right? So you talked about it, that APIs cannot be closed between the server and the front and the team while they're having lunch and talking about the API, right? So how do you make sure that Wix have like now over 1,000 of services right now? How do you actually think about the API UX? When I'm referring to API UX, is like if I'm working with Wix API, I want the experience to be really unified, right? So if I'm doing a paging or a sorting query on a specific endpoint, I want it to be the same on another endpoint. So when you think about it, it's beyond the service you're implementing. It's something way bigger. So how do you actually?
So let's talk about API UX in general. So you usually think again about the gallery and product page. So the product designed the user experience for it, the product with the UX. How it's going to feel for a user when he lands on the gallery, and this is really important. And you kind of need something similar for APIs, even if you're doing it internally, especially if you consider to open it for external companies. So I guess the UX, and I'm sure you've all seen it, would be the docs. You need to have some docs ready, and you can actually generate the docs if you're using a language such as Proto. Then you have the metadata about what is the API, and specifically Proto can easily be transformed to Swagger, and from Swagger you can generate docs. And this is exactly what Wix does to build the docs portal. So this is kind of the UX that you mentioned, but it's not enough. Okay, so
elaborate on that. So the docs are really, really nice, especially if your system is being, let's say, white labeled to the external world. So
that's amazing. But if each API will do paging a little differently, and there's images in many places, and each one would have different properties.
It's like some people doing a cursor-based paging, some people doing skip and take, and then you created the company when everything feels like not unified, and then for the external user, you feel like, oh, I cannot grasp like a fine-grained way to work with it.
You want to feel at home. Like if you look at API,
you want
to feel like you're in the same place. So how do we get there? So it took a few steps. The first step is to put one person, or at least one team, or these architects that would review all APIs. So assuming that they always give the people the same solutions, and they review all the APIs, then you will get the same APIs, and they need to decide on everything. So if they see paging, they need to stop and say, all right, so how does Wix do paging? They decide, and then they tell people what to do. And in the end, everyone has the same APIs. Obviously, this does not scale. It can't.
I remember the days when we started with it was pretty nice, and then we grew, and it was like way harder.
Yes. It doesn't matter if the team is 2, 3, or 5 people. They cannot possibly review. Also, as we said, API is a product, and it's deep within the business domain. So you cannot be an expert in all domains in Wix.
Agreed. So I think what they did, like when I remember this era when they had like we are like 5 people in the team, we cannot grasp it. So what they did actually, they created let's say like a common messages in Protobuf, which actually modeled the way we want to do paging, and then they told people like use that model to model paging.
That is the technical part, but before that, they had to create some kind of layer that would allow to create this uniformity without them having to review every API. Because the paging is part of it, but it's more to it. You want all APIs to have the same standards. And dilemmas, there are tens of dilemmas that I can talk about that we faced in Wix when it comes to APIs. So they build this additional layer of what we call in Wix the API masters that work. They all sit in the same forum, discuss API problems, work on the guidelines, and then they review the APIs in their companies.
So you're saying like basically if someone implements a catalog in the e-commerce company, or another person in Wix is doing like a cashier system or a payment system, at the end of the day, we as a company as a whole, we will make sure that all of them will do paging in the same manner.
Yes,
right?
As an example, for example.
And sorting and all of kind of like cross-cutting concerns, right?
Yeah, and there's so many things, like even the small ones. Which HTTP verb should I use?
Yeah, totally. It's a nightmare, definitely.
Right, so you want it to look the same. It might seem like a tiny detail, but you want to give good and uniform product.
Whether we're going to use HTTP patch or post for partial update, all kind of questions,
And the point is that these dilemmas come up, and then this forum can discuss them, and then there is a decision, and from now on, that is the guideline.
Yeah.
And when you have a big company, you need guidelines.
Maybe we need to emphasize another thing about using an IDL when we're using a proto buff. One of the big advantages of using an IDL language, whether it's like proto or Avro or Thrift or like whatever, like now basically most of our viewers probably write code nowadays in the backend with microservices paradigm, and they have multiple languages in the organization. So it's really, really easy to communicate between the languages, whether it's Node.js or Scala or Java or even, I don't know, C# or something. So once you have an IDL, it's really easy to generate the object for all of the languages, right? So,
Yeah.
so it's a yet another big advantage.
In Wix we do this. We have Node, Scala, and JavaScript
Yeah.
client.
And a bit of Python in the data organization.
Python, yes.
Yeah.
And they all generate their client and service on the same.
No, so yet another big advantage of just throwing JSON all over around, and just you can have a fine-grained schema. So I have another question, right? When you talk about working with the product team closely, so I guess when I'm working with the product team, when I'm thinking about designing a new domain, whether it's a catalog or order or like a customer or something, the first thing I want to do is like when I'm doing a domain discovery, is actually identify the read patterns. So how did you, when you designed the catalog, how did you actually detected the read patterns of the domain you're going to develop?
Okay, so this is interesting. Let's think. Okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Who are my users? Okay, so I have two of them.
I guess store owners, right?
Yeah, store owners is one of them, which I care. And actually, there's another section of users which I care about even more. And these are the buyers. So
it's essentially the users of your users,
yes.
Right?
So sometimes I say that if I don't have an option, I don't mind if the back office goes on fire, as long as everyone can buy. So when I design my service, I will definitely take this into account. I want the front where the buyers go. I want it to load so fast that their mind will explode.
Okay. So you know you know how to choose your battles, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So then I go, okay, so I need to think, what do I need from the front end? And when I actually came and asked, it turns out that I need quite a lot.
So when referring to that, you're saying like, I want to know how my users wants to read their data.
Yes.
Which kind of data attributes my API should respond with.
So let's look at real life. So probably 99% of my traffic is going to be to load the first page for the front. This is what most people want to see. Maybe I'll take this into account. Filtering is kind of important.
Definitely.
It's basically
search.
It's basic, yeah, search. And yeah, we just gave name and price as properties, but when you want to filter by it. But you all been to e-commerce site, and there's filtering, which is much more complicated.
Over that kind of price, below that kind of price. Maybe I want full text search or something.
Exactly. So I need to take this into account. In the back office, usually the requirements are not so complicated. Maybe you need some filtering, but I don't care about it as much.
Can you even share like a situation when you identify the read pattern along with the product guy? You identify the read pattern you need to have, and that affected your architecture in the design and implementation?
Yeah, of course. So initially when ecom was created, there was no search.
No search.
Okay. No
so
search.
Just plain MySQL database. And,
MySQL was great. And then requirements, which seems kind of simple, came up. You want just price, right?
Okay.
So, just simple, just price. So you want the product. She wanted to give this bar with the min price, max price, and then you can just toggle between them, even with price points maybe. But let's just say min max, and you can put the bar wherever you want.
Okay.
And it should filter.
Okay.
Easy.
Sounds like some makes sense. Yeah.
Great. So if I think about MySQL, and I assume this is the data model that I use, then I need to do a query to get the max and the min, and do a filter based on price.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I mean, I don't think that MySQL would scale really nicely.
What I think about along this kind of stuff is like somebody wants to search the product and says like, I don't know, like a vintage black dress or something. So
yes,
and that's it. It affects the way you design your system, because MySQL probably won't be like really beneficial to this kind of requirement.
If it was just the price, then full text search was not required. Maybe I can put an index on a database for price.
Yeah, it might be enough.
And I think it would work. And again, if you think scale, think about a store with maybe with 1 million products. These things do exist. You see, it won't be your 1%. It might be like 10 stores. But these 10 stores might take down the entire system if you don't do it properly. And these 10 stores probably the one that makes the most revenue.
I think
so
regarding
definitely care about
definitely regarding this conversation, it's like this is like one of the most one of the biggest actually advantages of working with the product and doing API first is like you actually know how you need to approach your data. Once you know how do you want to approach your data, how do you want to write it, how do you want to get it in responses. So when you really goes down beyond that, it affects your code and architecture.
So now
something that will never happen if you go and just write the code.
Right. So if I design my API and I already know that I need this query and it has many filters, not just price.
Yeah, like 10 filters or something.
10 filters, and I know I need aggregation not only on price. I can come up with more example if needed. I understand that maybe MySQL is not the ideal tool for
because
that.
Because MySQL is a big table with like 10 indexes. It probably won't perform that good, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So actually, this is like the great example to tell our viewers like why you need to understand your product before you write the code, because it will inherently affect the technology choices you're making.
Right. So it seems that well, MySQL or
any kind of RDBMS basically.
I think it works fine. There could be other choices for database. It works fine for the basic, querying and listing and stuff. It does work, but it seems that we need something in this case which is more search-oriented, that can do full text search, aggregations, filter by any column without having to worry as much about indexes.
I can even think about myself. The only commerce sites I'm using is like them with like a good search option. So okay, that's it for today. Thank you, Oded.
Thank you, Avi.
And you are more than welcome to leave us any question or remarks here below. Thank you and see you next time.